Joe, what drove you to write this book?
Well, I felt that there was not very much discussion in the trade union movement about the abandonment of the strike. The strike for the first 150 years was the central feature of trade unionism, but in the last 2 decades, the trade union movement has basically abandoned the strike. And if you look at our record over the last couple decades, you see a declining labor movement, and I thought that we really needed to refocus the discussion on the strike and what it could mean for the labor movement.
What kind of reception are you getting in your tour with the book?
Yeah, I've been traveling around the country talking to all different kinds of trade unionists, and we've been having great discussions. I've been, talking about the history of the strike, how it made the labor movement so strong in the period from the 1930s through the 70s, and about the legal restrictions on the right to strike and so forth. And we've been having a really good discussion. People have a lot of questions about it, but there's real receptivity to rethinking some of our ideas.
Are you getting any pushback on your criticisms of the various organizing strategies and political strategies that labor's advocated in the last 30, 40 years as an alternative to striking?
Not really. I mean, there's a fair degree of openness to that. I think in the early 1990s, the labor movement abandoned the strike and adopted an organizing approach, saying that we needed to focus on organizing shop by shop. That hasn't worked. SEIU, for example, spent $1.3 billion between 1995 and 2006. But I think there's a pretty good recognition on the part of most trade unionists that what we're doing right now is not working. Politics isn't working, organizing's not working, so there's receptivity to new ideas.
Well, what about the question of politics? Because that always seems to be the answer for the top trade union leaders. What's your take on that?
I think if you look at the restrictions in labor law, what you find is that it really doesn't matter that much in terms of Democrats and Republicans, that there's been this bipartisan effort to control trade unionists and to curtail the right to strike. And that's been going on for 75 years, and it's not going to change by electing a new Congress. It's going to take worker self-activity, and in particular, it's going to take a revival of traditional strike activity.
What do you think about the kind of insurgent campaigns we've seen recently, Don Trementozzi and the communication workers and Sandy Pope and the Teamsters? How does that fit into where you think we're heading?
Well, I mean, I think if you look at it in general, the labor movement has always needed an insurgent element, and that's really what's been the heart and soul of trade unionism. And if you read any history of strikes, even going back to the 1930s, what you'll find is that there was often conflict between workers who wanted to fight management and those in the trade union leadership who grew a little bit more comfortable in their positions. So I think what you see is a lot of restlessness on the part of trade unionists, and they want to see some change.
Well, do you think that strikes can be won given the current leadership that we've got? I mean, on the top levels of the AFL-CIO, Teamsters, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be difficult. That a lot of times the trade unions are our own worst enemies. But I think what we're going to need is probably new forms of worker organization. We're going to need ways to shield union assets. One of the biggest things that courts and judges have over unions is that they can threaten the unions with their loss of their buildings and their assets. So if we're really going to try and revive the labor movement, we need to find ways of working around that, maybe by creating new forms of organization that don't have these assets and don't have the entrenched leadership to deal with.
What do you think about rank-and-file caucuses like Teamsters for a Democratic Union and Railroad Workers United, which I happen to be a member of? Do you think they're going to play a role as well in this?
Yeah, I think those organizations, group like Labor Notes, which is a group we're here doing a fundraiser for tonight, are extremely important in the future of the labor movement. Without a strong rank-and-file, without union democracy, we're never going to have a revival of the trade union movement in this country.
Once again, we're talking to Joe Burns, author of Reviving the Strike, here at the Vermont Workers Center in Burlington in August. And thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you. Madison and any general strike, and how general strikes, at least have developed here in the United States, have been strikes where workers go out on strike and pulling up workers. And what you saw in Madison is that the teachers democratically made a decision to go out on strike, and that's really what was at the core of the Madison struggle, and that's what made it happen the way it did, and pull in all the community support. And then they also made a decision to go back to work, and it was unlikely that you were going to see a general strike without public employees leading the way, no matter how much people wanted to see otherwise. Maybe